We all know that the right habits and mindsets can be transformational in how we live our lives. But among the sea of advice online, it can be challenging to know who to trust with these important life decisions. At The Standard, we answer those questions and introduce you to some of the most successful people in the world in their fields and the habits and the mindsets they've used to achieve their success. To learn more about our social platform, head on over to www.thestandardapp.com. And now, your host, myself, Chris Pelletroni. Welcome to another episode of The Standard. I am your host, Chris Pelletroni, and today's guest is Lyn-Genet Recitas. She is a nutritionist and coach. She has a company specializing in anti-inflammatory, thyroid, hormone, and autoimmune health. She is a New York Times bestseller with The Plan and the Metabolism Plan, and a new book coming out in 2025. In this episode, we cover a lot of ground. Obviously, she is an expert at all things nutrition. So we start off with going a little bit into her background and how she got into that, which started at a very early age of 14 and dealing with some migraines and searching for a way to alleviate them. And that sort of was the jump off to her nutrition. She's been a lot of things, but over the last decade or so, she's become a well-known author and has really developed a different understanding of nutrition and the need to customize nutrition to the individual. We talk about her best habit and mindset and the idea of trial and error when it comes to the way she approaches food, bringing more attention and awareness to the foods that she eats. She, throughout the episode, demystifies some of the general food assumptions that I think we all have. I found this completely mind-blowing. I'm absolutely going to have to read her book because it goes against some very conventional wisdom, if you will. We talk about nutrition and why it should be customized to the individual and how to do some of that. And really, her big message here is to love your body. And that's really what she's about, is how does she help as many people as possible love who they are, enjoy their journey, and to enjoy their life. And so I really enjoyed this episode. I've been following Lyn for a few years now. And so I'm glad that she was willing to come on and share a little bit more about herself with us. So without further ado, I want to welcome Lyn-Genet Recitas. Well, Lyn, thanks for being on the podcast. I am excited to chat with you. I have done a tremendous amount of research, although this episode is not going to center around your expertise per se. One thing I really do enjoy doing is understanding a little bit more about your background. And also, I couldn't find online through any of my research, so I'm hoping you'll sort of color this in, is why you got into nutrition in the first place. So I think it'd be really helpful for our listeners if you could take a couple of minutes and just give us a little bit of your background, and for me specifically, help me understand a little bit of like, what was it about nutrition that made you go down this path? I mean, sports nutrition, you're an author, you're a best-selling author. So yeah, please share a little bit of your background if you can.
Well, I used to have chronic migraines, and I went to doctor after doctor, and my migraines would last 3 days. And if anybody's had a migraine
Mm.
and it happens monthly, I mean, you know how horrible it is. And the summer I was 14, we moved to San Diego, and it was the summer, and I had a migraine the entire summer. And I'm like, this is it. I can't deal with this. And I'd been reading about, being a vegetarian. And so I decided to do it, and my migraines were gone.
Mm.
That was it. And I remember one time when I was 18 testing beef, and it came back. So I wound up becoming a baker
Mm.
for a very prominent hippie vegetarian restaurant. And that allowed me to talk to people that were much more involved in the world. And so I was pretty interested in nutrition. That had helped me. And then when I was 18, I had a friend that did shiatsu, which, if folks know, it's a massage that uses the basic meridians that are used in acupuncture. And she cured a mutual friend of stomach cancer. Crazy.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, there's a lot more out there. But I was also very successful in the restaurant business. So I kind of kept I was studying herbology and, all sorts of stuff. And this summer when I was 25, not the summer, the year that I was 25, I had a bunch of extra money. And I'm like, let me just study the shiatsu thing. And for me, that was very pivotal because, first of all, in Chinese medicine, there's really no such thing as something being psychosomatic, and that your diet is tailored to what your body needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're an acupuncturist and you see that the liver and spleen are out of balance, then you would give foods that are liver and spleen, basically. And I'm like, that makes sense. Like tailoring food to meet people.
Yeah.
And so, I would just have clients. I was 25 then. I'd have clients, blah, blah, blah. And then I decided in 2000, after opening two very fancy restaurants, that I'd had enough and I just want to concentrate on nutrition and wellness. So in 2007, I opened a holistic health center in Harlem.
Mm.
And that's where it all started to come together, because it's before Harlem was all bougie and rich now. I mean, it was just very much mixed, and I'd have every sort of, person come in, race, color, economic class, and they would spend a good amount of money at my center because I also had children's classes, I had acupuncture, nutrition, massage, the whole thing. And we started to do, and I've always used the 3-day food cleanse that I've used. It's modified now, but I've always done a 3-day food cleanse with my nutrition clients. And so we did that in 2008. And because we just became such good friends, I said, this is back in BlackBerry, just message me and let me know, what's going on and how you're doing after the cleanse. And what I found was amazing. I'd always been taught that after you have this wonderful vegetarian vegan cleanse, the worst thing you can do is introduce animal proteins.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this one mom who was a stay-at-home writer, and she was a vegetarian. So and her big thing was just depression, yelling at the kids in depression. The whole cleanse, she's like, Lynn, I feel great. This is amazing. And then she had black beans on day 4. And she just immediately spiraled into depression and yelling at her kids, the very thing that she was trying to fix, And the next day she was up 2 pounds. Well, that's weird. I don't know why, but maybe not eat black beans, right? It's like not rocket science. And then I just started to track people's reactions to food more. And these were healthy foods. 2 pounds from salmon, 2 pounds, well, actually 1.8 pounds from asparagus, 2 pounds from cauliflower, 3 pounds from artichokes. And so I started to for my client, of course, I'd say, okay, well, you can't eat this food. But then I started to notice, well, for like 85% of my clients, this healthy food isn't working. So I started to just keep what is now the reactive food list, which amazingly enough has not changed that much since 2008. And of course, now I work with people all over the world gauging their responses. And the prevailing theory at that time was that obesity caused inflammation.
Mm.
But what I was seeing was inflammation was causing obesity and immediate exacerbation of whatever health thing you were trying to fix. So if you had arthritis and you ate an inflammatory food, based on my research, the arthritis would kick up, or the depression, or the constipation, or the migraines. And it was individual to each person.
Yeah.
And somehow or another, a bunch of fancy magazine editors in New York found out about me and started to see me. And I spent actually more time in this headquarters than I did at my health center at that point. And one woman said, what you're doing is amazing, and I want the world to know about it. And it took her a year of talking the editor-in-chief, actually she was editor-in-chief, whoever's controlling her, to print an article about me. And so she finally did. And in the article, I said, oatmeal is the devil. And oatmeal is the devil, by the way. And the next day, I woke up with 900 emails in my inbox from all over the country, people I didn't know. Thank God you said that. I hate oatmeal. It hurts me. I feel gross. I can't eat it. Everything that's negative about it was eliciting this response from them. And they're like, oh, I'm eating oatmeal because my doctor said to, eat oatmeal to lower my cholesterol. And the ironic thing is, if oatmeal is an inflammatory food for you, it's actually going to raise your cholesterol
Mm.
because that's what inflammatory foods do. They get to this weakest link, and then they keep exploding from that. So I wrote a book, and everybody's reading it. The publicist is bringing it to all these news stations, and everybody's like, we really love the concept, but we can't have her on because we're telling people to eat salmon. We're telling people to eat turkey. Like, it would counter everything we're saying. And so I'm like, wow, that kind of sucks because I'm sure you can write the best book in the world, but if people don't know about you, it's not going to sell. And for some reason, they pitched it to Dr. Oz, and he said, this is very interesting because it seems to be a mix of different nutritional theories from all over the world and combined it into one, which is actually what I've done. And so he had me on, and it was amazing. The response was just amazing. And all of a sudden, I'm a New York Times bestseller, and my book's published in 15 languages, and all sorts of good stuff. So that's my story. Started off with my pain, started off with clients' pain and trying to figure out why, because I know there's always a reason why, but you don't have the foundation to figure out why. So
Once again, this whole pie, we're going to dive into your habits and your mindsets. But I actually watched a number of your, I guess you'd say, like your news clips, if you will, and I started diving in. And yeah, I think when I started listening to it, and I feel like I eat healthy. I feel like I have a decent understanding. I've read some nutrition books, and then I see you talking about how too much exercise can be counterproductive, and be careful of the strawberries and be careful of the quinoa. And I'm like, whoa, 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 dude. I mean, like, this is just going up against, like, as you probably have experienced, like so much of our knowledge or what we think is factual. When you mention the cleanse, though, just to make sure for those listening, because I think this is really intriguing, the cleanse is, correct me if I'm wrong, the cleanse is an opportunity to hit the reset to some extent on your body, right? And then from there, my wife, I think's done some, and then it's from there, it's slowly introducing the foods back, and then paying attention to the effects that they have on you. Is that sort of the spirit behind the cleanse?
yes, and the way I arranged the whole days 1 through 30 was taking the least inflammatory foods and testing those. So I'm not going to tell you to test lentils, and I'm not going to test you to tell beef, but both of those are lower reactive, so that would be one of the first tests. Because when you're doing the cleanse, and as you know, like the microbiome can like change in 72 hours, like amazing stuff happens. And it would just be really mean to introduce salmon if it doesn't work for you. So that also allows people a lot more time to heal and a lot more time to listen to their body. Because the big problem is we're listening to the experts. And I'm sure you know research is cherry picked or it is used on a population that has nothing to do with you. And so you keep reading, oh, this is what you do because guys in France that are cyclists, this is what they did. Well, it's like, I'm not a cyclist, I'm not French, I'm not a guy. So why should I do what they're doing? And that's really the biggest problem is that many people try to make nutrition easy and it's not. And the older you get, the harder it becomes because of the loss of digestive enzymes, because of the loss of saliva and stomach acid. So the pizza that you could eat when you're 25 is hitting you like a brick when you're 45. And for me, the biggest thing is people that eat healthy and they're 20, 40, 100, 200 pounds overweight. And they go to their doctors or their nutritionists and they're saying, there's no way you could be eating this and weigh this weight. And it's pretty mean because they are doing it, but they're having the salmon and the asparagus and they're choking it down. And when they find out, Jesus, it was the salmon, and the weight starts flying off of them, it just allows them to reconnect to their body and to understand it's not normal to feel bloated after a meal. It's not normal to feel joint pain. It's not normal to have swelling in your hands. And when you start to say, oh, that's my body loving me, it's saying, hey, don't do that. This really sucks for us. It just creates a whole new way of looking at food, I think.
Yeah, you're blowing my mind here. Bear with my naivety, if you will. So you do this cleanse. You slowly start to introduce foods, sort of on a anti-inflammatory scale, if you will. Not all foods, but just certain foods. And although I listen to you say a lot of like a lot of people, this may be anti-inflammatory for them. It still does come down to the individual, right? So it's even if I forget the exact ones. If strawberries have some anti-inflammatory components to them or quinoa, it may not be that way with you. And so the goal is to like pay attention to how you are reacting to each of these things and to figure out which of these things are or are not going to affect you in a negative way. That's sort of the goal of that, right? And this is the metabolism plan book, correct? That you wrote?
Absolutely. So I did the reactive food list, which I told you about, and the foods that are 20% reactive, and the foods that are 50% reactive, and the foods that are 85% reactive. And that doesn't mean it's going to be bad for you, right? If something's 85% and it works for you and it's a healthy food, then who cares about anybody else?
Yeah.
So, but the idea is to give you an insight into why foods react in a certain way. For instance, there's no such thing as a low histamine diet, and it really bugs me because any food that's inflammatory automatically causes histamine to rise. And that's your capillaries leaking fluid. And that's actually what we're measuring every single day when you are doing the planner metabolism plan, because you were supposed to lose zero point 0.4 every day. And you're losing zero point 0.4 and things are great and you're really happy and you're feeling really good. And then all of a sudden you bring in some gluten-free whatever and you're up 2 pounds. You're not changing the caloric value of a day, right? So how is it that you gain 2 pounds and you feel really crappy? That's a histamine response, which then triggers a response of cortisol rising, skewing your hormones, attacking your thyroid, skewing your gut. So the more you eat those healthy foods, now you have an autoimmune disease, and one autoimmune disease leads to another autoimmune disease. And it's just, for so many people, this is when they're trying so hard and they feel like their body is failing them. It's just, it's a really sad place to be in. And they really hate feeling like that. But you can't do a diet that works for a TikTok star in their 20s and you're 55. Like it's just not going to work. And trying to adhere to principles that have absolutely nothing to do with you just causes you to distrust your body. And that's a bad place to be in.
I haven't heard you talk about this, but I'm curious, and maybe this is a little bit more speculation, but it makes so much sense when you say each of our bodies are unique in the way that we're going to synthesize food and which ones are anti-inflammatory. Like I get that. And I recognize that like, there are certain people that may be other similar to other people, but the point is like you've got to sort of trial and error it for yourself, be attentive, figure out what works, and then make the modifications. And that makes so much sense because when we think of like wellness and mental health, on a very large scale, like what works for you may not work for me. Right. And we're going to talk about your habits in a minute. And what I've learned in interviewing all these cool people across the planet is everybody has a different strategy for how they navigate some of this, which makes total sense. So my question for you is why do you think, and I'm going to broadly classify this as the nutrition industry, which may not exactly be the right term, but why do you think we've all latched on to these like concepts that may not serve us well of salmon's good for you and don't eat a French fry and eat
Yeah,
quinoa.
French fries are so good for you. French fries are so good for you. It kills me that people are having cauliflower, which is 85% reactive, and avoiding the French fries. Like, fun stuff can be low inflammatory too. And unless you're in wheat, you probably do not have the digestive enzymes that have been built up over generation for it to be a healthy food for you. The same thing with quinoa. If you're native to Peru, sure, it's a really healthy food, probably. But if you're not, to your body, it's like you're eating rocks from Mars. So you also know that when it comes to research, there's a lot of cherry picking.
Yeah.
So if Mars is conducting a study on how healthy chocolate is, they're going to find people that skew towards chocolate's really super healthy. And a lot of research, the people I work with, it is most effective for are women over the age of 35 and men over the age of 55.
Okay.
And women, unfortunately, have a harder time just because our hormones are always in flux, and that causes stress in your body, and your body's working so hard all the time that you do lose those digestive enzymes sooner than a guy will. But when guys are in their 50s and 60s, they're like, oh my God, you're right. Losing weight is really hard. And why do I feel like crap all the time? And so many studies are not done. Like I just had a bunch of nutritionists say, I have all these perimenopausal women and menopausal women and they can't lose weight. And I'm telling them to eat healthy foods and I feel really bad.
Yeah. It just makes so much sense, like, everything should be customized to the individual. It almost feels like, and I recognize studies can be cherry picked, but I would say even more when I think of, like, a nutritionist, someone that's gone to school, they've gone the classes, they've read the books. It feels like, and I'm not a nutritionist, so please correct me if I'm just completely off my rocker. It feels like so much of the quote unquote research, unlike what you're doing, is more of like, here's health in a box. Like, just go about it this way, eat these types of foods, do this type of exercise, and you're going to live a healthy life. And then as I hear you talk and what I've researched is you're like, yeah, there's some truth in that to some extent, but it's much more customized to the individual. And it feels like I've never heard it said that way. I've always heard it as like, just eat colorful vegetables and try to eat lean meats and go exercise. And then like, I mean, literally, I mean, I'm almost having a hard time like trying to recalibrate that thought process. And here you come along saying there's some truth in that, but only if, as you've sort of gone through the cleanse and start to introduce these, they don't have an adverse effect on you. And that makes much more sense than the nutrition in a box. And I'm just curious, like, why do you think, is it just because studies have been cherry picked, or uh, it feels broader?
Well, I mean, a lot of the nutrition journals and a lot of our doctors are reading texts that might be 40 or 50 years old. So even the information that they're getting around nutrition is from pharmaceutical companies. Or once again, they're just given the wrong information. There's no such thing as a diet for diabetes. There isn't. I'm working with somebody right now, and he does amazing when he has pasta and pizza. God bless him. I don't know how he does it, but his sugars are always in the 90s when he has those foods. And it's just so hard when you're being told don't eat the fun foods, the foods you love because they're bad for you, when in fact you're cutting out things that are joyful, and food and eating should be joyful.
Yeah. So fascinating. Last question I have before we dive into your habit. I think you had mentioned that there was this editor that had convinced you to write a book. Was writing a book, and I know you're an author of two books, right? Or is it more? You've got two main books, the plan and the metabolism plan, right?
It was really hard. I mean, you have to remember, I built this whole plan based on each individual, and now how do I take that and make it a general testing methodology for the rest of the world? Somehow I didn't. The first book came out, I switched some things. I switched the testing order to see what worked better on a universal level, but it's all still the same. And when I had, after that More magazine article, and people were like, oh, you need to write a book. I'm like, I can write an email. I can't write a book. But I guess the impetus to help people and to sort of open their minds as to what nutrition is. I mean, everybody says this is bizarro world, like everything's upside down. and and the more like when I train doctors or nurses in this, they're like, this is so crazy. How can this be? But it is.
No, that's phenomenal. Well, I wanted to do a deep dive into your background because, like so many of the guests that we have, their background and sort of their personal life experiences have really shaped their profession. And you are no exception to that. And so I'm so curious. The core of the rest of this will be really looking at a habit that you have. I know you probably have a lot of good ones, but we'll only have time to dissect one, and then we'll pivot over to a mindset. So, with that in mind, at this stage of your life, is there one particular habit that really serves you well for your mental health, your well-being, your overall success?
Yes. And I know you hate it when a nutritionist says it's nutrition, but when you mention the mindset, it's the mindset that's important because people say to me all the time, "Do you cheat?" No, I don't cheat. I test. It works or it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, it's going to make me feel like crap. And I don't want to feel like that. And I think approaching foods that way is so much better. On my Facebook page, the one that's for everyone, I say all the time, tell me the craziest foods that are low inflammatory for you and the healthy foods that mess you up. I've had Fenway Park hot dogs, beer, ice cream, all sorts of things that, granted, that's not a regular part of their diet. These are healthy people, but to be so restrictive, and that might just be the people I deal with. I think a lot of people I get are like, nothing else has worked. Lynn, please help me. And those are my folks. So that's really my mindset. And I think it's healthy to approach your scale as a tool. Like if you take your temperature, you're not going to get mad at the thermometer, right? It's just giving you information. The scale does the same thing. So if you do really well with Parmesan cheese, and that is super low reactive, and you test mozzarella and you're up a pound, okay, don't eat mozzarella, but you have Parmesan, so who cares? Same thing with a turkey burger. Turkey burgers suck for most people, and beef burgers don't. So if you test the turkey, it doesn't work, and the beef or the lamb does, you're still having a burger. And it's not going to be an effective lifestyle if I tell you to just eat zucchini and plantains for the rest of your life, right? So the more you can approximate the way somebody eats, the more effective it's going to be.
So the mindset for you is the way you approach nutrition, and it's more of this testing to see if certain foods, how they react, or how you react to certain foods. That's the mindset that serves you the most at this moment. Do I have that right?
I think it's more than that because you have to have flexibility in the way you approach stuff. So the foods that you pass now, some of them aren't going to work a year from now. That's just the way it goes. So if you're eating lamb burgers and fish and vegetarian stir fries, and those are your low inflammatory foods, you can be pretty sure you're going to lose at least one to two of them in a year from now. But that's okay because you get in other foods that you love. So I think we're all programmed to be too rigid in this works and it's going to work for forever, or this food is healthy. I don't care if it's not working for me. It works for Marilyn Monroe or whoever. And just not listening to your body.
That's so interesting because I was actually going to ask you that question. If once you lock in the foods that serve you well now, if you're just good to go. Because my question was, you would be like, well, I mean, after you test stuff for like a year or two, you're golden, right? I mean, you just live the rest of your life. But you're saying what works today, if you find the foods that serve you the best, that are anti-inflammatory, that help you regulate your weight or lose weight or whatever the goal is, in a year or 2 years, that may not be the case. So it's I don't know if intuitive the word I'm thinking of, but it's sort of this, to your point, it's this mindset of testing, but it's almost like you have to, maybe it's not intuition, it's you have to be willing to look at those foods consistently and not just mindlessly consume food. It's like you always have to almost be on the lookout for how the meal or how that individual thing is affecting you in order to, I guess, achieve your long-term health goals. Is that, I'm saying that a little clunky, but it sounds like it's more than just eat a meal for the sake of eating it, because it may be well today, but in a month it may not be good anymore.
Obviously, the flexibility is really super important. And most people only eat 20 to 30 of the same foods on a weekly basis. So it's pretty easy to identify when something isn't working for you. And yes, you can do the official testing of days 1 through 30. But one of my favorite stories regarding this is I was working with a couple. She wanted to lose 50 pounds and he wanted to lose 100 pounds. And I tell people, as soon as you lose like 40 or 50 pounds, you have to retest your food. Your like chemistry has just completely changed. So they ignore me, of course. And like 2 years later, she comes to me and she's like, Lynn, I've got high cholesterol. Uh, the plan's supposed to lower cholesterol. What's wrong? The plan sucks. And I said, did you retest your foods? And she said, no. So I said, come on, let's work together for 20 days. I'll figure out what's not working for you. And sure enough, lamb, which had been one of the most powerful foods for her, was not working anymore. So she gave up the lamb. She lost even more weight. And most importantly, her cholesterol dropped 40 points in a month. That's that's a reason to stay on a diet.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think too, my wife has done some of this in the past. And what's interesting, you haven't mentioned this. I'd be curious on your take on it. In her younger days, we're both in our early 40s. She could drink alcohol and no issues. I mean, we could have a bottle of wine between the two of us or a couple cocktails. We don't drink a whole lot, but it wouldn't affect us in any negative way. Now she could have a sip of a cocktail and she's automatically, her nose is stuffy. She can barely breathe. And it's
That
only come on in like 2 years, like out of nowhere.
I'm going to tell you why. Histamine. When you eat a food, and that's why her nose is clogged. Her levels of histamine right now internally are just too high. So for her, I would tell her to do what I do with all of my clients is that you take MSM for 6 weeks, which is a natural antihistamine and just naturally lowers the histamine levels. And of
Yeah.
course, don't drink alcohol at that time because we want to get the body out of fight or flight mode. But yeah, runny noses, headaches, joint pain, that's all a histamine response. And it's kind of cool if you know what's going on. But if you don't, it's really weird.
Well, yeah, I think we've just chopped it up as to like she just can't drink anymore. And once again, it's not like that's a earth-shattering thing for us. We don't drink a lot, but yeah, we got like a family celebration. We're at some friend's house. Like, it'd be nice to have a drink every now and then. And like literally almost looking at the glass of whatever she's drinking would stuff her up. And it's just been so odd. I'm gonna actually she loves reading and loves all this. I'm gonna turn her on to this because it's what's got me thinking. I've recently hired a sports nutritionist. One of the other guests on this podcast, Dr. Audrey Lee. She's a sports nutritionist for endurance athletes. So I recently hired her, and I'm going to turn her on to you and be like, are we following some of the stuff that Lynn's saying here? Because to your point, I eat like the same 20, 30 foods all the time. Bananas, like the shake, I make the same 2 shakes every day, same set of ingredients. And I'm so curious, like, is it affecting my performance in any way? Because I've never done a reset.
Yes, because if you eat the same foods every day, you're going to develop a slight food sensitivity. It just happens.
Yeah.
Every food has its health benefits and every food has its health risks. And if you keep consuming that food, it can pose an issue. So I like to use spinach as an example. Spinach is super low inflammatory. And but it has two compounds that really interfere with most people. One, it's rich in oxalic acid, and the other is that it attacks thyroid function. But if you have spinach on day one, like your whole body's like, yay, spinach is so good. I love spinach. And you're like, wow, I lost a pound and I felt great and I slept through the night. I'm going to have spinach again. At that point, maybe your neuromuscular system and your thyroid was like, hey, I could break that down on day one, but no, not so much. And you're confused because you're like, I was just running 15 miles and I felt great, and now I can't like run 2 miles. And God forbid you have it on the third day, because at that point your body says, I give up. I just can't process the problematic compounds in this food. So you don't need to be crazy about it unless you want to, because the science is super, super interesting. And I do find that if you have the genetics to be an endurance athlete, you're lucky and you can eat more crap. So just remember that, because you guys just burn through stuff. But most people are not built to be athletes, especially over the age of 50. And that's when everything just kind of seems to come crashing down on you.
I'm so curious with your nutrition. So this mindset of yours is approaching food from this sort of trial perspective, and it's a continuation throughout your journey because to your point, it changes all the time. What is your goal with your nutrition? Like, what is your personal, what are you trying to achieve with this mindset and with the way that you eat?
I want people to love and trust their bodies. That's it. Because most people don't. And that's a sad place to be, I think.
And so is that your goal, is to just get
That's
to
it.
that's it?
That's it.
Okay.
It's when somebody says to me, I can't believe all I need to do to feel well and lose weight is eat. Like that's profound. So yeah, it's allowing, I've developed a methodology that allows each person to test what's important to them, whether it's running 15 miles or whether it's getting rid of their arthritis. It's a metabolism plan, what is helping you to understand your reaction to the varying stimuli in your life, whether it's sleep, whether it's stress, whether it's exercise, whether it's food, whatever. And when you start to say, wow, every time I run 15 miles, I don't feel great, but when I run 10 miles, I feel really great, then that's your body talking to you. And it might just be because you've been running 15 miles for too long and your body's like, hey, we need a break. You take a break, and in 3 to 6 months, you're back to running 15 miles. I mean, that's a rough explanation.
Yeah. God, this just reminds me of, I remember this concept of, yeah, I think we've all heard like the Malcolm Gladwell, it's like 10,000 hours to become really good at something. And then there was another gentleman that did some research and he's like, well, it's not exactly 10,000 hours. It was more about being deliberate practice. Point being is going through the motions for the sake of going through the motions does not actually give you the lift that people are looking for to become great at something. It's this idea of deliberate practice, which is why I'm bringing it up. It reminds me of the way you're describing this is you have to be intentional about the practice that you're putting in so that you're not just going through the motions, you're consciously aware of what you're doing. And it's that conscious awareness that allows you to be more in the moment and allows you to actually get the benefit that you're looking for. And it really sounds like the way you're approaching your nutrition is just that. I was also hoping, Lynn, you said something too of like, you're doing this because you want to live to be 100 years old or something. But I have to imagine if you get good at figuring out what works for you as time goes on in your life, you live longer, you're healthier, you're fighting diseases, less likely for dementia and all that other, like, I mean, all that stuff,
Yeah,
right?
I'm writing a new book, an anti-aging book, but the first thing you need to do is you need to stop inflammaging, which means you need to identify whatever's causing inflammation for you, and
Yeah.
then you need to start back at a cellular level and building yourself back up, because everything we've done and over the years, and you did this when you're 30 and you did this when you're 40 and all of a sudden you're 50, and all of your friends are getting arthritis or type 2 diabetes or god forbid cancer, and you're like, I don't want to be this person, I'm too young
Yeah.
to feel that way. So for me there's a lot of motivation, but yes, I'm working with a woman right now who's in her 80s and she has pulmonary fibrosis, which has a very short period of life. And she's lived 5 years doing the plan, and she's working with me now. And she did the first 3 weeks, and now so cute. I had her learn how to do hip hop dancing, because when you create new neuromuscular junctions between movement and your brain and your feet, that just it makes you young again.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's been a lot of research that suggests that neuroplasticity and the ability to learn is not just isolated to young kids. Like it really is can carry through your entire life. But I guess cliche is to say, if you don't use it, you lose it. Right. So you've got to constantly flex it in some way, shape, or form. So fascinating. Okay, let's pivot over here. So you have this mindset. It's surrounding nutrition. It's this spirit of trial and error and making sure that you're aware of what you're eating and how it's affecting you. So we're good on the mindset. Let's pivot over to a habit. Is there one habit right now that, similar to your mindset, is contributing the most to your well-being, your success, your mental health?
It's so hard to say because since I've been 14, I've been eating consciously, just knowing that some stuff doesn't work for my body, and I'm almost 60, so that's a serious habit. But I was thinking earlier, because I guess I'm just going to bypass that because I just do it because I don't want to feel like crap. But my mother was bipolar and schizophrenic and very abusive, and she had migraines, and she always felt awful. And she'd say, Lenny, what should I do? And I would like come up with this plan. I'm like, okay, you can do this, you can do this. Like I'm 5 years old and do this and this. She's like, okay. And she never did it. And it would break my heart. But now I have people that I can give the same sort of advice and then embrace it. So for me, that's really important.
So for you, it's the, just to make sure I'm capturing this. So for you, it's about being able to share the advice of eating healthier, because, and these are for your clients. I think the way you were speaking right there, it's you have these clients coming to you looking for a better path. You're able to sort of supply the knowledge to get healthier, I guess, from a nutrition standpoint, and they're able to actually they're motivated enough, I should say, to start to take that advice and apply it in a way that betters their life. Am I capturing that the way that you intended?
Yes, and there is a lazier way to do it. And a lot of people like doing stuff that's lazier. So some people will just take the reactive food list and say, I'm just going to eat that's 30% and lower and see how I feel, and they can feel better. I've written a couple of cookbooks, and all of the ingredients are the least inflammatory ingredients in the world based on my studies. So just start using the cookbook. And that, for some people, that's enough. That's all they need. But some people need more help. So if they need more help, I've got more help. But
Gotcha.
yes, I guess it's really in the spirit. I mean, I'm not a minister or something like that, but I really do think I'm trying not to cry right now. It's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting too, because whether we're talking about your habits and mindsets or just in general, and this is, I've always been so fascinated about this. There's the knowledge part of it. How do we learn something, whatever it may be, whether we're talking about reducing stress or anxiety or depression or how to exercise or how to eat, there's this knowledge, right? Knowledge is power, but knowledge is irrelevant if no action is taken. And that's a really interesting thing too, is, I've interviewed some great scientists, and we talked about climate change or nutritionists or fitness people, and it's like, yeah, I can teach people something, but if until they get to a place where they're willing to take the first step and they're starting to build the momentum and the habits, they haven't really learned anything. And that's what I always find so fascinating, is like, how do you get, and I think your situation may be different, because it sounds like a lot of the clients that come to you, and I think you said this earlier, I'll get the words a little wrong. They're coming to you because they've tried so much, and I don't want to say they're at the end of the line, but they're incredibly frustrated that the efforts they've put in have not produced the results that they're looking for, and yet they still want change. And so you're dealing with a highly motivated person, and thus the knowledge you're able to give them is well received. And it sounds like
Yes.
that's one of the things that's a little bit different. It's like it doesn't sound like you're having to motivate people to take action. It's just they're desperate, might be the wrong word, but they're desperate enough where they just need something that's very different than what they've tried, and thus your knowledge is just really well received, and thus they take it, they make the change, they start to see the results.
I always tell people, first of all, you can heal every day. Until you're dead, your body wants to heal. And there's always a reason why. And how many people have come to you saying, why am I depressed? Why can't I lose weight? Why do my joints hurt? On and on and on. And there's a reason why. And to know that you don't need to see some specialist in Vienna, but you can figure it out on your own is, I think, really powerful. It's really empowering.
Yeah. It makes me think of a couple of friends I've had, and this is a little bit of a tangent, where being diagnosed with a certain, I'll just say disease or condition that's rare, and they go to the doctor and they get a very stock response. Go take this test, go meet this person, and it just doesn't sit with them well. They're like, and obviously highly motivated because a lot of conditions can be, they can be so severe to the point that, you'll die if you don't solve for this. And I had a good friend, and he's young, he's in his 30s, and he's very analytical, and he got these very stock responses from his doctor, and it just bothered him. It felt too off the shelf. And so he took it upon himself of like, I will become the expert now. I will learn more about this one thing than you know, Mr. Doctor. And then he would go seek all these different professionals, read the books, all this different stuff, find the patients, and he would be able to sort of stitch together a more sound explanation for his condition. And in his particular case, and I've seen this happen multiple times, is they sort of beat the odds. And it's because they've done the due diligence and they didn't accept the stock response. They very much like your nutrition, they they customized it to them. And it was the customization that was the breakthrough. I just wonder all the time, is like, how do you scale that? How do you scale that?
I think you bring up something that's really important. I'm not slamming Western medicine, does a lot of amazing stuff.
Yeah.
But if you see an endocrinologist, they're just going to deal with that. If you see a cardiologist, they're just going to deal like that. And there's no communication between them because there's no way you just have one major disease or illness without it affecting the entirety. And if they're not talking to each other, I don't care how good of a specialist they are, something's going to slip through the cracks. And it always does. Or the medication you're taking for this doesn't work for this. So, not like I'm touting Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, but I do like the concept of looking at the person as a whole.
Yeah.
And how do I fix the whole instead of how do I fix this disease?
I'll say one point here and I'll get to my final question for you. I'm a big nature guy. Like, I love gardening. I took all the classes, and there's this movie that came out. It's a documentary. It came out probably almost 10 years ago. It's called The Biggest Little Farm. If you haven't got a chance to watch it, you should watch it. It's fun. It's this, this wife is a cook, and this husband, I want to say he was a photographer. Anyways, they quit their day jobs and they bought 200 acres, and I want to say it's in Los Angeles area in California. 200 acres. They knew nothing about farming and all of this, and they wanted to build this beautiful farm with animals, and they could sell the produce and all this good stuff. And they did it. And it's a documentary of how they turned 200 acres of dirt into this beautiful oasis. And one of the really beautiful messages that came out of this was that nature is an ecosystem. What happens in one isolated part of this farm or isolated part of this planet has ripple effects to everything else. And so, one of the big things that they were trying to learn was, how do you create an environment where it's as natural as it can be, but it's not overly unbalanced, if you will. And so the whole journey of this thing was really fun because they'd run into a snail infestation, and it's like, how do you solve this, but do it in sort of like this ecosystem permaculture type way. And it just reminds me of how humans are so much like that as well. Nutrition, so fundamental, but I think you would even agree it is one part of you. How you deal with
Yes.
stress, how you sleep, how you exercise, how you deal with all these other things, like, all of it feeds into each other. And I think that's where I think people get overwhelmed, is like, you got all these things you gotta worry about. You gotta keep all the balls in the air, right? We've got lives and families and careers, and then how do you sleep well and eat well? And it's I'm always trying to figure out, like, where's the easy button, Lynn? Like, where do you just click this button over here and it all just works out? But I just, when you were talking, it just reminded me it's important to understand that, like, you can't just look at one aspect of your life. It is the whole ecosystem of the way you live that will determine your health, how well you thrive, your well-being, your mental health, and so forth. So I'm always trying to connect things to nature, and I feel like I was one of them. Final question I got for you, Lynn. So much of this is focused on you as an individual, but in the spirit of we're all connected, is there a particular habit or mindset that if you could wave a wand and all 8 billion of us on this planet could develop this habit or mindset, is there one that you think would nudge us as a society in a more loving and kind direction? Is there one this would?
Okay, well, I think you know the answer. It's just I'm a very simple woman at times. I want people to love your body. If you can't trust your body, you can't trust anybody else. You're not going to do well. And that just projects. But if you're kind to your body, the kindness emanates.
I love it. It's that simple. Treat yourself as you would treat others. It has a ripple effect. Well, this was so fun. Where can people go to learn more about you? Where's the right place to send them?
Luckily, I have a very unique name. So if you just type in Lyn-Genet, like a bunch of stuff comes up. There's my books. I'm active on social media. I try to really help people. Like you don't need to be a client to sort of get pearls that you can use. So social, my books, and that's pretty much it, I guess. I guess when my new book comes out, I'll do some touring and I'll come and say hi. But yeah, I love when people reach out and tell me how good they're feeling and to know that there's a reason why they're not feeling good and you can fix it.
I love that. And just so we can get a sneak peek, when do you think your new book will drop?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. See, the
Suspenseful.
hard thing about the metabolism plan was like when I wrote the plan, people were like, this all sounds anecdotal. And doctors will be like, actually, I want to see a little more science. So then I wrote the metabolism plan, but then it had too much science. So people are like, this is really confusing. So I'm trying to, when you're talking about mitochondria and ATP and all, you have to make it so that it's fun. I try to be your best friend who just happens to know a little more science than you. And I explain it in a way that you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And I'd love to say that it's going to be January of 2025, but
It's well
I
worth
don't
the
know.
wait. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for having the patience. I know we had a little tech issue, but we navigated through it. Thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself. It was wonderful to have you on, Lynn.
Well, thank you. And I have to say, when you initially approached me and you were like, tell me a healthy habit, and I'm like, I don't know. You really helped me and you help other people to say the motivation. I think the motivation starts the healthy habit. And whatever order you want to put it in, I love the way that you are setting this scenario up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Standard. Before we go, click on the link in the show notes of this episode to learn more about today's guest. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody who you think would benefit from it as well.